She thought she could even run other people's farms and called the police on an innocent farmer, thinking she was going to put the world to rights. But karma had other plans. What happened next was a true masterpiece of justice, and I guarantee you'll love every second of this story. If there's one thing I've learned from living on a farm, it's that there will always be someone who thinks they can dictate how you should live. And of course, there will always be a citizen, or citizens in this case, willing to turn anything into a problem. I've lived on this property for over 20 years, inherited land, worked with sweat, the sun on my forehead, and a lot of patience. I wake up early, look after the animals, plant, harvest, and live my life without bothering anyone. But it seems that some people can't see others living in peace. This time's misfortune came in the form of a woman who had just arrived in the area. I don't know where she came from, but she was one of those people who arrive wanting to change everything. The neighborhood here has always been quiet. Everyone in their own corner, helping out when needed, but not sticking their noses in where they don't belong. But this woman, oh, that woman didn't get the memo. The first sign that she was going to be trouble came when I started noticing crossed eyes every time she passed the front of the farm. I could just be feeding the horses, and here she would come with that look of disgust, as if I were, I don't know, sacrificing kittens in the yard. Then the innocent comments were thrown to the wind. "Oh, that smell," she said, looking like she'd stuck her nose in a bucket of manure. "Honey, that's called a farm. If you wanted to smell like lavender, maybe living in the country wasn't the best idea." Until then, I just ignored it. I let her talk to herself, because I'm not one to waste time with people who have nothing to do. But things started to escalate. First, she complained about the noise of the roosters in the morning. Then she started picking on the cows, saying that they made too much noise. But the pinnacle was when she came to talk about my chickens. My chickens. According to this woman, my chickens were a danger to the neighborhood. That's right, a danger. Because, according to the great farm expert who had never set foot on one in her life, the chickens were aggressive and could transmit diseases to her dogs. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, she had 3 lady poodles, and she thought my chickens were a mortal threat to them. I tried to be polite. I said that the animals didn't go anywhere near her house. They were on my land, well looked after, and had never caused any trouble. But do you know what happens when you try to be reasonable with people like that? Exactly. They double down on idiocy. And that's how, one fine day, I found myself standing in my yard, holding a bag of feed, looking at a police car that had just parked at the entrance to the farm. Yes, she had called the police. And, my friend, if you think this story ends here, hold on to your hat, because it only gets worse. I've been through a lot in my life. I've dealt with a flood, a drought, a crop blight, a cow that ran away in the middle of the night, and even a snake that decided to live in my barn for a week. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the sight of a police car pulling up in front of my farm. Because a woman had gone berserk over my chickens. There they were, 2 policemen getting out of the car, fastening their seat belts, looking around with that expression of someone who already knows they've been called out for something stupid, but needs to pretend they're taking it all seriously. And who was standing outside my fence, arms crossed and nose held high? Her, the creature who had decided that chickens were a public danger and needed law enforcement to solve this terrible rural crime. One of the policemen came up to me, while the other tried, without much success, to calm the woman down, who was talking non-stop as if she were denouncing a drug cartel and not a bunch of chickens squawking in the yard. "Good morning, sir," said the policeman in a polite but tired tone. "We've received a complaint about problems with your animals." I smiled and held back the urge to laugh in his face. "Problems? What kind of problems?" The policeman sighed and looked down at his clipboard, probably trying not to show how ridiculous it was. "The lady over there reported that your chickens are aggressive and that they pose a threat to her dogs. I took a deep breath and mentally counted to 10, because I knew that if I opened my mouth at that moment, it would just come out ironic. And I didn't want to make the policeman's job any worse than it already was. Meanwhile, on the other side, the woman was gesticulating like crazy, pointing at the chickens as if they were an army of feathered demons ready to attack. "Hey, they're advancing on my fence," she screamed. "And there are feathers all over the place. That's not hygienic. My dog ate a feather the other day and got sick." The second policeman looked at her like he was trying to process this information without losing faith in humanity. The first policeman turned to me with an expression of someone who just wanted it to be over with. "Sir, can I take a look at the place?" I made a broad gesture with my hands because, frankly, I wanted him to see for himself how stupid this story was. He went through the gate and followed me to the chicken pen. What did he see? Nothing. Absolutely nothing wrong. The chickens were there, scratching away peacefully, some roosting, others sunbathing. None of them were breathing fire or trying to break down the fence with brute force, as the woman wanted to make it seem. The policeman crossed his arms and shook his head slowly, as if he already knew that this was what he was going to find. "Do they always stay here?" he asked. "Always. This fence is over 5 years old and there's never been a problem." He looked back at the woman, who was now watching us from a distance, uneasy, as if she couldn't believe that the police weren't handcuffing me right there for illegal possession of dangerous chickens. The second policeman, who was still trying to listen to the complaints without rolling his eyes, gestured for her to come closer. "Ma'am, you have all your property papers in order. The chickens are inside the fence and pose no threat." The woman's eyes widened in indignation. "Aren't you listening? They're dirty. They make noise in the morning. That can't be allowed." The first policeman, out of patience, decided to put a stop to it. "Madam, there is no violation here. This is a rural environment, and farms have animals. If you don't want to hear chickens or see feathers in the wind, perhaps you should consider living somewhere else." It was at that moment that I realized that the woman didn't know how to lose, because instead of accepting the police's answer and getting on with her life, she had one last outburst of grandeur. "Then I'll call the town hall," she shouted. "I'll call the environmental agency. I'll call a lawyer. This can't go on like this." The two policemen exchanged looks of sheer exhaustion. The first one looked at me and gave a half smile, the kind that only those who have seen a lot of stupidity in their lives can give. "Good luck with that, sir," he said, before turning to the woman and adding the icing on the cake. "But if you keep making false reports, you'll end up getting a formal warning." Ah, the beauty of seeing the color fade from her face. The woman closed her mouth, turned on her heels, and walked away, not even looking back. And what about me? I went back to my chickens, satisfied. But little did I know that this story wasn't over yet, because if this woman was dumb enough to call the police over a chicken, she was also dumb enough to get into something even worse. And karma, my friend, was just getting warmed up. If this woman had the slightest bit of common sense, she would have stopped there. But, as you can see, common sense was a concept far removed from her. After the police visit, I even thought I'd gotten rid of the problem. That was naive of me, because people like that, when they lose, don't accept it and move on. They double down on stupidity. And that's exactly what she did. About a week later, a friend of mine who works in the town hall called me. "Dude, your neighbor filed a complaint against you." I held the phone tightly, feeling my patience drain away. Again? Again. This time, the accusation was even more absurd. According to her, my farm was causing environmental impact and putting public health at risk. Yes, she basically claimed that my chickens were a walking ecological disaster. I had to laugh, because at that point, all I could do was laugh. And you know what was better? This time, she didn't realize that she had stepped on her own ass. Because when the prefecture receives a complaint like that, they don't just look at the accused, they do a full inspection of the whole area, including the complainant's house. 2 inspectors showed up at my farm the next day. I was already prepared, with all the documents in hand, ready for another round of this clowning. They arrived, analyzed everything, checked the health records, made sure the animal waste was being disposed of correctly, and, of course, found nothing wrong. In the end, one of the inspectors even commented, with a smile at the corner of his mouth, "Yeah, it looks like that complaint was a bit hasty." But the best was yet to come, because, as I said, they don't just look at the reported property. They also check the surroundings, and that's when they discovered that the woman's house was completely out of compliance with environmental standards. And when I say out of line, I mean that this woman managed to get herself into a lot more trouble than any HOA fine. First, her backyard drainage was illegally connected to the community sewer system, which meant she was dumping waste illegally. Then they discovered that the house had a poorly treated swimming pool, practically a dengue swamp in disguise, with standing water full of mosquito larvae. And, to top it all off, there were building materials dumped in the yard, accumulating dirt, and posing a real environmental risk. In other words, while she accused me of being a problem for the environment, she herself was a walking sanitary disaster. And this time, it was she who got the fine. And it wasn't a token fine. It was a blow that would make anyone rethink their life choices, totaling an amount that would probably cost more than she spent decorating that ridiculous house. When she received the notice, I swear I could have popped some popcorn to watch. The woman collapsed. First, she tried to argue. Then she threatened to call a lawyer. Finally, she started screaming that this was my fault, because, in her mind, it all made sense. She ratted me out, so the universe conspired against her. And what about me? Well, I just leaned against the fence, arms folded, and let karma do the work. But the best was yet to come, because, in addition to the fines, the town hall gave her a deadline to regularize everything, and if she didn't make the corrections in time, more fines would follow. And the icing on the cake? Someone, I don't know who, okay, maybe I do, warned the HOA about the irregularities. And, as anyone who has ever dealt with an HOA knows, they love to meddle in other people's lives when they have a loophole. So now, in addition to owing the city, it would also have to account to its own neighborhood committee. And that, my friends, was the beginning of the end for her. Because once the HOA starts chasing you, there's no turning back. In the end, fate has a very creative way of dealing with people who live to make others miserable. And this woman? Well, she learned that the hard way. After the town hall came to inspect her house and discovered irregularities, the whole neighborhood found out. Here in the countryside, news travels faster than a loose horse on the road. The woman was already disliked, but now she was the subject of gossip on every street corner. You could see the frustration on her face. Before, she paraded down the street with her nose held high, as if she were the highest authority in the neighborhood. But after she was caught with the disgusting swimming pool, the irregular sewage system, and the rubble in her yard, her pose disappeared. The problem was that she didn't know how to lose with dignity. Instead of putting her head down, correcting her mistakes, and getting on with her life, she went into total destruction mode. First, she tried to play the victim, telling everyone that she was the target of a smear campaign. According to her, I had orchestrated a conspiracy to make her life a living hell. As if I had time for that, with so much work to do on the farm. But nobody fell for it. So, when she realized that no one was on her side, she decided to throw a tantrum. And then, it just went downhill. She started leaving ridiculous notes in her neighbors' mailboxes, messages written in capital letters, full of indignation, saying that the neighborhood was falling into anarchy, and that the real problem wasn't her house, but certain residents who thought they were above the rules. Ah, yes, in this case, me. She also tried to appeal to the HOA, but what she didn't expect was that the HOA had been watching her for a long time. You know that arrogance of people who think they'll never get caught? Well, it turns out that the HOA hadn't forgotten about all the little infractions she'd committed over time. The noisy parties she denied having, the neighbors had proof. The complaints she ignored about loose dogs, all on record. And, of course, now that they had an official reason to pick on her, they weren't going to miss the opportunity. The HOA started sending one notice after another. First, demanding that she fix everything that was wrong. Then, imposing short deadlines and heavy fines. And when the deadline passed, and she didn't do anything, the fines doubled. The woman simply went crazy. One day, as I passed her house, I saw the most comical scene of my life. She was at the door, shouting on the phone to someone while holding a bundle of papers, probably the notices she had received. I could hear half the conversation, and from her desperate tone, it sounded like she was talking to a lawyer who didn't want to take her case. I just leaned against the fence and stood there, pretending to check the wire, but actually enjoying the spectacle. The following weeks were a real show of humiliation. The neighbors, who had previously avoided confrontation with her, now spoke openly about it. People who never got into fights started commenting on how nice it was to finally see this woman getting what she deserved. And then came the final blow. She couldn't pay the fines. The amounts were too high, and they kept getting higher. The HOA made it very clear that if she didn't settle, they would take formal action against her, and that could lead to her losing her house. And that's when she gave up. One day, out of the blue, a for sale sign appeared in front of her house. That's when I realized the game was up. She wasn't going to be able to turn the situation around. She had no allies left, and she was being suffocated by rules that she herself had helped to impose. And the best thing of all? When the new family came to visit the house to get to know the place before buying, I went over and made a point of giving them a good rundown of the previous residents' history. I didn't mean any harm, of course. I just wanted to make sure that the future neighbors knew what they were dealing with. Shortly afterwards, a moving truck showed up at the house. She didn't even have the courage to go out and face the neighbors on the last day. She simply put her things in the car, put her head down, and drove off. And so ended the era of the woman who tried to destroy my farm and failed. Now, everything is back to normal around here. The sun rises, the chickens sing, and nobody calls the police about it. If there's one thing this story has taught me, it's that karma may take a while, but it always arrives. And if you agree with me, leave a like and a comment.